Hello everybody. Let's talk stages. The goal is to cover everything that relates the stage you're on to how well your run is going. Basically, how much do the different stages impact your run? Are there better stages than others? Before we begin, there is one important thing to note. The info presented is largely based off of my personal experience. There isn't really any quantifiable data we can go off to determine the usefulness of a given stage. You can and probably will have different opinions on the stages, and that's okay. All right, here are some of the factors that determines a stage's rank. Number 1, movement. Number 2, visibility. Number 3, density. And number 4, secrets. Movement is how well you can traverse the stage with little to no items. This factors in both the stage's overall size as well as how much verticality there is. Basically, a smaller stage with less cliffs would be easier to travel across and therefore better. Visibility is how well you can see the locations of the items and or the teleporter. The less clutter in the way, the better you can see and the more efficiently you can plan your route. Density is where the actual locations of the items are. The closer the items, the less travel between them and the quicker you can get to the teleporter to leave. Each stage has many different spawn locations for items and will randomly choose which spawn locations to occupy. Obviously, you can have a usually great stage give terrible item spawns and vice versa, so know that the density rating is based on the average spawns. Finally, secrets relate to any guaranteed spawns on the stage, whether that be Newt altars, the Prayon accumulator, or anything else. As at the Skills 2.0 update, there are 2 possible tile sets per stage, so I'll rank both maps for a given stage against one another only. At the end of the video, I will choose my favorite overall stage. Let's begin with the first stage 1 tile set, which is Distant Roost. For movement, it gets a 7 out of 10. While it seems like there may be a lot of hills and valleys to traverse at first, there are plenty of ways to get around on Roost. The 2 biggest methods you should use are climbing the hills on either side of the big bridge over the center. Accessing the top portion without having to walk all the way around the cave is a huge time saver, and other than when the teleporter is all the way across the map on the little island, this makes Distant Roost pretty easy to get around. For visibility, it gets a 6 out of 10. There are a lot of walls and other terrain in the way of seeing item spawns. However, you can get very lucky and have a crazy center stage spawn where like 4 or 5 chests will just be sitting there waiting to be gathered. I'd say that if you get a teleporter spawn that is not on the island, you can easily see everything you need and ignore the island entirely. This will save you a bunch of time. For density, it gets an 8 out of 10. Where the stage lacks in visibility, it makes up for in size. It is a tiny stage, again, if you essentially ignore the island. In most cases, the items you'll buy will be nicely packed for you around the center area, and accessing them all is a breeze. For secrets, there aren't any. No guaranteed altars, no secret chests, no special items, just a regular old stage. Overall, I can't complain about Roost at all. The teleporter spawn locations are very easy to figure out, and you'll know within the first 20 seconds or so being there whether or not you have to waste your time and run all the way across to that little island. The second stage 1 tile set is Titanic Plains. For movement, it gets an 8 out of 10. The majority of spawns will be on the lower portion of the map, which is almost entirely flat. If you do have to get up top, there are quite a few ways to do so, and none of which will take up too much time. For visibility, it gets a 9 out of 10. Easily one of the best maps to see what you need. There will rarely ever be a teleporter spawn that you can't see right off the bat, and all of the items are usually in plain sight as well. For density, it gets a 5 out of 10. You will have items scattered all over the place due to the size of the map. This means a lot of backtracking and wait, where was that chest again? If you lose focus. Just because you can see everything doesn't mean you can get there in a good amount of time. Finally, again, there are no secrets on this stage either. Now, between Roost and Plains, I'd have to go with Titanic Plains every time. The only downside to Plains is how big it is. Other than that, it is easier to get around and easier to see the items, meaning you can better plan your route and more efficiently get out of the stage. For the first stage 2 tile set, we have Wetland Aspect. Its movement rating is a 4 out of 10. Over the past few patches, we have received some quality of life updates to add some rocks here and there to better traverse the numerous hills and cliffs, but even with these additions, the stage is still one of the worst to move around on. There is just far too much verticality to the stage, and without a Hopu feather or built-in mobility, you will struggle getting around. The visibility rating is a whopping 3 out of 10. Yes, you heard that right. Wetland Aspect sucks for visibility. There is clutter every which way you look. One trick you can use that slightly helps in this regard is when standing in the water, simply look up until you can see what's underneath it. Otherwise, you'll likely miss out on a couple chests or equipment barrels due to them hiding under the water. For density, it gets a 5 out of 10. Not only is the map hard to get around and hard to see, but it's also a large map. Once you add in the verticality as well, the items that can spawn are all over the place. Wetland is a prime example of just find the teleporter as soon as you spawn and only buy the items you see that are on the way to the teleporter. There is no point in scouring every single nook and cranny just to find one last chest. Wetland Aspect does have one secret, the Altar to Nukahana, which unlocks the Nukahana's opinion. However, once you get the item, there's absolutely no reason to ever visit it again. Therefore, I don't really count it as a real secret because it has no impact on your run. The second stage 2 tile set is the Abandoned Aqueduct. For movement, it gets a 9 out of 10. The desert stage does have some little hills to climb, but none require jumping, and you can easily sprint up the walls for everything. Other than that, it's just a big flat stage, definitely one of the easiest to move. For visibility, it gets an 8 out of 10. The way I think about it, there are 2 sections of the map. The section with the big pit in the center and the section with the actual aqueduct above you. The rest of the map are just the different paths getting between those 2 sections, meaning the teleporter is always going to be where you didn't spawn. If you spawned right next to the pit, the teleporter will be somewhere near the aqueduct. If you spawned in the aqueduct, the teleporter will be around the pit. It's simple as that. For density, it gets a 7 out of 10. The stage is quite large, but usually the item spawns are kind to you and they stay relatively close to those paths I mentioned earlier. Rarely do I ever find myself lost or backtracking for an item. Finally, Aqueduct has not only 1, but 2 secrets, and unlike Wetland, both actually do something for you. The first is the giant door, which is opened by standing on the 2 hidden pressure plates simultaneously. This gives access to the Renaud and Chiaro fight, and if killed, they each guarantee a drop of their respective band, meaning you could theoretically get 2 free items every time you go to the desert stage. The other and more relevant secret is the guaranteed Newt altar inside of the massive skeleton on top of the cliffs. This altar will always be there regardless of whether or not you have the other 2 spawns as well. So if you want a blue portal, you will always have the options to get it on the desert stage. Also, if you don't know or can't figure out how to access any of the secrets I will cover in the video, check out my full secrets guide. A link is in the description below. Ranking both stage 2s against one another, there is a clear winner, the wetland aspect. Haha, I got you. Of course, it's the Abandoned Aqueduct. In my mind, there's no comparison. The only exception is if you can seriously not stand the Clay Dune Striders or Clay Templars, because neither of them will spawn on a wetland aspect. In all other cases, I'd rather have Aqueduct 10 times out of 10. Moving on now to stage 3, we'll start with Rallypoint Delta. For movement, it gets a 9 out of 10. Like Aqueduct, there are plenty of hills and walls, but the actual verticality of the stage is quite low. You can easily run or single jump your way up the cliffs to reach any items you may need. Other than that, the stage is flat and wide open. For visibility, it gets an 8 out of 10. While the cave system does hinder how much you can see and therefore how much you can plan a route, the majority of items will be outside of the caves, meaning if you have to skip the caves, it's not that big of a deal. If you see like 2 large chests, a multi-shop, and a few regular chests in the center area, just take them and head out. There is no reason to scour the map for every item and chest, so having a large amount in plain sight is great. For density, it gets an 8 out of 10 as well. The center area is basically the whole map. The teleporter will be at either end of the center or straight in the middle, meaning all the items you get are clustered around this area. Again, with the exception being when you get a cave teleporter, in which case you have to waste a bit of time traveling for the items. For secrets, again, there are 2. The first is another guaranteed Newt altar, although this one is much less accessible than the one on Aqueduct. Look above the center of the map and the huge crates on the cliffs, it's all the way up there. If you don't have a ton of mobility in your kit, so loader or mercenary, or a lot of items to help you, you probably won't be able to reach it. The second and more relevant secret is the Prayon accumulator. As long as you arrive to Rallypoint around the 9-minute mark, you should be able to reach one of the 3 possible spawns with ease. Getting a free Prayon is a huge power spike to any runs early game. The second stage 3 tile set is Scorched Acres. For movement, it gets a 2 out of 10. This is not to say it's impossible to move around this stage. No, once you learn all the little tricks to getting around, it's not terrible. But my word, is it the worst stage for movement. It's like wetland aspect, but with even more verticality. For visibility, it also gets a 2 out of 10, mainly because of the color scheme. The entire stage is red and orange, meaning if you can't see the actual teleporter itself, good luck finding it, because the normal process of looking for the red particles will rarely help you. Occasionally, you will see the particles before the teleporter, but it is definitely not the norm. Even if you ignore the colors, there are so many walls and pillars in the way of stuff that finding chests that aren't right in front of you is a nightmare. For density, it gets a slightly better 4 out of 10. As with every stage, you can get some great RNG and have tons of items situated in the same spot, but for the majority of times you're on Scorched Acres, the items are going to be splattered across every direction. Perhaps the only redeeming quality of Scorched Acres is that it also has a guaranteed Newt altar spawn. It takes a bit of time to get to, but it does not require a lot of mobility to do so. However, considering that Rallypoint also has a guaranteed Newt, but more importantly, the freaking Prayon accumulator, Scorched Acres is a joke comparatively. I have never seen someone comment on my videos or in my streams that they prefer Acres over Rallypoint. And now everyone's gonna comment, I like Scorched Acres, Mr. Streamer, smiley face. Last but not least, we have the stage 4 tile sets, starting with Abyssal Depths. For movement, it gets a 7 out of 10. There are some sections where you'll just take extra time if you lack mobility, but for the most part, every part of the stage is just as easy to access with or without tons of movement items. You can use the various geysers and chains to better maneuver, and once you learn which walls you can sprint, jump, and which ones you can't, moving around is not a big deal at all. For visibility, it gets another 7 out of 10. Visibility isn't actually as big a deal on these stage 4 tile sets because around this time in a run is where you want to stick around and farm. Moving quickly is still ideal, but you don't have to be extremely efficient, and you can scour the map for a few extra chests if you want. Similar to Rallypoint as well, the cave system is really the only downside of finding stuff. Just think of it as a separate section of the map and that it requires some extra time to go through and you'll be alright. For density, it gets an 8 out of 10. There are a lot of items on this stage. Make sure you look on all levels of the upper parts and around every nook and cranny on the lower sections. You can easily pull a good 10 or 15 items from an average Abyssal Depths alone. Hopefully, you all should know the secret on this stage, the guaranteed legendary chest under the rocks. The criteria for farming this chest is whether or not you have the ability to kill everything on the stage in a reasonable time. If you're struggling due to bad RNG or any other reason, I'd advise buying everything but the legendary chest because you receive a much larger power boost than if you were to bank everything on getting a run-changing red. And the final stage we'll cover here is the newly added Siren's Call. For movement, it gets a 6 out of 10. Not great, but not terrible either. It is a largely vertical stage, but similar to Rallypoint, you should be able to play around the center area and think of the rest as different sections that you'll have to devote extra time for. There are plenty of built-in ways to traverse the various heights, meaning you don't need to rely on mobility items. For visibility, it also gets a 6 out of 10. As long as you know where to look, the teleporter can't really hide from you on this stage. The items are also pretty easy to spot, and as long as you're running around, you should be able to find what you need. For density, it gets a 5 out of 10. While you are able to easily spot stuff, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to get there easily. Getting anything that's not in your immediate vicinity will require a couple hoops to jump through and add some extra time onto the stage. However, much like Abyssal Depths, it's not that big of a deal because if there's ever a time to farm in the first loop, it's on stage 4. Finally, there is also a secret to this stage, a boss. Destroying 6 of the bird's nests that are scattered across will spawn the Alloy Worship unit, which is sadly a detriment to most runs. The boss of Siren's Call is equivalent to Abyssal's legendary chest because upon death, it drops a random red item, 1 per party member. However, defeating it is much easier said than done because it scales so much faster than the rest of the monsters. If you do kill it, the amount of time you wasted is probably equivalent to farming for 2 or even 3 legendary chests, which means unless your RNG is stellar and you pulled some run-changing reds again, your next stage is going to suffer greatly due to all the time you lost. Between the two, I would much rather have Abyssal Depths than Siren's Call. I don't loathe getting Siren's Call, but Abyssal Depths is better in pretty much every way in my opinion, especially due to, actually getting the guaranteed red item. And if I had to pick the best overall stage, I would say it's Rallypoint Delta. There is just so much that stage does right, and it just feels good to play on it. Simple as that. Some of you may be wondering why I don't cover the gold, blue, or celestial portals, because those are technically stages, and the reason is because they aren't really a part of the core loop. You have to go out of your way in one way or another to access them, and they offer something entirely different than the core gameplay loop once you arrive. Perhaps once we get some more hidden realms, I'll make a list covering and ranking them as well. But for now, that's it. If you have any questions or comments, leave a message down below. You can check out my stream at twitch.tv/WoolieGaming, where you can come hang out and experience the best and most on Twitch. True story, by the way, guys. And also consider joining our Discord server for notifications when I go live, upload a new video, or just to have a place to hang out. Thank you for watching.